Namaste and welcome to AIDIA Dialogue. International Day of UN Peacekeepers is commemorated every year on 29 May. On this very day, we would like to pay our tribute to all the peacekeepers for their invaluable contribution for peace. In this special episode of AIDIA Dialogue, we have invited Ms. Valerie Julliand, UN Resident Coordinator in Nepal, as our guest. And I will discuss with her broadly on the UN peace operation and particularly Nepal's contribution to international peacekeeping. Valerie, welcome to AIDIA Dialogue.
Thank you for inviting me.
We are very pleased to have you here this morning.
Thank you.
As we are celebrating the International Day of UN Peacekeepers today, what's your reflection regarding the role of UN peace operation for establishing world peace since its establishment in 1948, I guess?
That's correct. Well, I think it's a very important moment in the history of the world. With the start of the United Nations in 1945, the decision was to have an organization that will ensure a certain type of world order in order not to see again the deadliest Second World War that the world had experienced, with more than 60 million dead. I mean, it was atrocious what happened during the Second World War. So definitely the United Nations were created with this mandate to keep peace in the world, to make sure that alternative solutions to violence and war were found, and especially through dialogue. So of course, while we were working on development, on dialogue, and so on and so forth, there was also a need to have military forces on the ground as an alternative to violence. So that's how the peacekeeping operation started in 1945. And I think since then, it has demonstrated that actually it is very useful. One has to understand that the peacekeeping operation of the United Nations, it's not a warring party. As I say, it's a mechanism in order to avoid war. So that's why actually, in order to establish a peace operation, there are three principles. The first one is the consent. You cannot push an operation if the parties are not willing to have it. Then the second one is actually the impartiality. We don't take side. You know, we are not here to support one side or the other. Absolutely not. And the third principle was the non-use of force. Once again, the peacekeeping operation of the United Nations are not a warring party. So they are not there to shoot, to kill. They are on the contrary. They are there to find other ways and to make sure that the populations are protected. So I think that this was a necessary complement. If you want, the Secretary General has at his disposal several departments. He has a department for humanitarian action, he has a department for political affairs, and it was necessary to have a military department in order to make sure that when there was a situation of danger and violence, we could bring an alternative.
And do you like to share some major success stories which are worth remembering on this special day?
I think, you know, if you look at the world today, of course we tend to focus on the very sad event, for instance, of the actualities of today's Syria, Yemen, and so on and so forth. But there are so many places where wars have been avoided, where peace has been found, where the UN were involved. And if you take the contribution, for instance, of the Nepali troops, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, I must say it's important to remember, for instance, the contribution of the Nepali troops in the recovery after the ethnic conflict in Burundi, or in the disarmament of all the soldiers involved in the war in Sierra Leone. So there are many successes. But what I want to also mention here on that occasion, since you offer me that opportunity to discuss about this, it's a very difficult job to be a peacekeeper. And let's not forget that so many peacekeepers have lost their life. More than 3,000 of them have lost their life over the many years of peacekeeping operation, out of whom 72 were Nepali. And these people are actually going on a mission, knowing very well that something can happen and they can lose their life. And I think it's important on these days of the peacekeeping operation to remember them, because they have made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure peace in the world.
At times, I believe peace is a very dicey subject. For instance, at some moment, peace for me might not be peace for you. Like there are some failed mandates in the past, like in Rwanda, former Yugoslavia, and Somalia, which were highly criticized as well. What should be learned from such shortcomings? What's your opinion on this?
You know, I think that this operation indeed, for instance, if you take the case of Rwanda, the genocide that occurred there, the UN have not managed to prevent it. And I think the lessons that have been learned from Somalia, from Rwanda, from former Yugoslavia, first of all, we need resources. You know, faced with some conflict where the warring parties are numerous, well-equipped, determined, you know, you need to have enough resources to face that. Once again, it is a dangerous mission that the peacekeepers are implementing. So the lack of resources in these instances that you mentioned were one of the reasons why it didn't work. But also there is the other element, which is the lack of political will. You cannot intervene and bring peace if the parties to the conflict are not determined to go into that direction. You know, the political will of the parties involved, as well as the countries that support one or the other party, is essential. If you don't have that political will, you cannot do it. But also I think the lessons learned from these sad stories was the necessity to adjust the mandate of the peacekeeping operation. And there is a very strong focus now that is on the protection of civilians. Because more and more what we see in the wars today is that less and less military are killed, more and more civilians are killed. So therefore the main mandate of the United Nations peacekeeping operation is actually to protect civilians. Civilians could not, should not, never be the target, and unfortunately they are. So these were lessons that have been learned. And equally, there has been some adjustment that have been done in the functioning of the UN. For instance, when a peacekeeping operation is there until, let's say, the gun stops. This doesn't mean because the gun have stopped at that moment that peace is there. Peace needs to be consolidated. So that's why later on the UN decided to create the Peace Building Commission as well as the Peace Building Fund to be able to continue an effort to keep peace, to maintain peace, to consolidate peace. And actually the work of the United Nations, even beyond the peacekeeping operation, even through the work that we do of development, has an objective of consolidating peace. If you take the case of Nepal, Nepal was at war until 2006, then signed peace. Till today, 13 years later, the work that we do has also the objective to consolidate peace. Because peace is a very fragile element. It can be disturbed very easily, but it takes time to consolidate. It takes a number of interventions. Peacekeeping is one, development is another one.
Talking about peace, we cannot forget Nepali peacekeepers. Nepal is among top 10 troop contributing countries for UN peacekeeping mission. I think it's 6th largest troop contributing nation. Since 1958, Nepal has contributed to more than 120,000 peacekeepers in different more than 40 missions. How do you see the role of Nepali peacekeepers in maintaining walls, security and peace?
First of all, indeed, I want to commend and thank the government of Nepal for their contribution to a peacekeeping operation. As you rightly said, 120,000 Nepali peacekeepers have contributed to more than 70 peacekeeping missions in the world since it started in 1948. And currently we have 14 missions deployed in 5 different regions and about 100,000 peacekeepers currently deployed. And actually in total, we have had more than 1 million peacekeepers deployed over the years of the history of peacekeeping operation of the United Nations. The contribution of Nepal is very important. First of all, the troops that are being sent are usually highly skilled and well-trained, which is very important. But also, the UN have been very grateful to the Nepal army to accept to deploy in very difficult places where sometimes other countries didn't want to deploy. So the contribution is essential. Once again, as I said, let us not forget that when sending troops, these people know very well that they might die. Actually, here in the UN House, we have a memorial for the 72 Nepali peacekeepers who lost their life while in service for the United Nations. And this contribution is essential. And you know, peacekeeping troops have different mandates. One, as I say, is to promote peace, to promote dialogue, to ensure the physical security of civilians. So it means that this contribution that Nepal does, it's not only to peacekeeping, although it is directly, but through the peacekeeping operation, the contribution of Nepal is to peace, it's to development, it's to stability in the world. And you know, it takes a lot of courage for a nation to send its soldiers to fight in another country, to be present in another country. There are not so many countries that actually contribute, you know, countries, but definitely Nepal is, as you mentioned, the sixth biggest troop contributing country, and its contribution is very much appreciated.
In 2018, Birendra Peace Operation Training Center of Nepal was awarded with training recognition to the contingent pre-deployment training from the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operation. This also indicates the increasing excellence of this training facility as well. Meanwhile, Nepal is forwarding its voice to make this training facility a regional training academic institution, something like Ghana's Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Institute, something like that, but that has not happened. Can you see this thing happening in the days to come?
Certainly, in the sense that there is also a recognition that peacekeepers need to be trained in a large scope of issues. Let's say the military training with which a soldier comes is of course essential, because peacekeepers are soldiers and police being deployed in a theater of war, of hostility, of danger. But beyond that, there is a necessity for the peacekeepers to be sensitized to a number of issues. First of all, human rights. It is so utterly important that peacekeepers, when they are deployed, have an understanding of what human rights are, and their obligation, as well as the obligation of the states where they intervene and in the name of whom they intervene, have to be respected. So I would say this type of training that the Birendra Center or other centers, as the Ghana one you mentioned, or others in the world, it is essential, because peacekeepers have to be trained in human rights. They have to be trained on the functioning of the United Nations. They have to understand how governance function, how NGOs function, because they will be partners. They will be interacting with a variety of actors while on the ground. So these centers are essential. So the necessity to have more and more regional centers in order to have a capacity to train many soldiers in view of their deployment is essential. So I believe that this type of center, like the Birendra or others, are going to continue to exist and to develop further. Because as I said, these pre-deployment trainings are essential for the success of a peacekeeping operation.
And how UN can support in this mission, I guess. Nepal is always forwarding its voice to make this training facility as a regional training or academic institution, but that has not happened yet.
Oh, I think that there are a number of criteria that need to be met, and certainly these are discussions that are going on, and it is not at my level that these discussions are taking place. But one element that is very important is the certainty that the people that are sent in a theater of conflict and war under the banner of the United Nations, we need to be sure that those soldiers have not been involved in any violation of human rights. So I would say this message is for Nepal as it is for all the troop contributing countries. It is very important to vet the soldiers that are being deployed, because it cannot be that people who are sent in the name of peace might have themselves a very sad human rights record. So I would say these are a number of criteria that need to be met, and Nepal is currently in discussion with the United Nations to meet those criteria. But the respect and adherence and compliance with human rights and international standards, including in the country of origin of the peacekeepers, is definitely an important requirement.
And is Nepal taking enough initiation for this?
We are pushing in this direction.
So despite being one of the largest troop contributing countries in the world, it's often said that there is the voice that the role of Nepal is not being recognized and reflected in the high-level decision making. For instance, there was no any representation in social representative of the Secretary General SRSC from Nepal in any of the United Nations peacekeeping mission. What's your take on this?
Oh, I think that there are less positions than there are countries, members of the United Nations. So I would say it should not be taken as an offense in the sense that 193 members of the United Nations and this position that you mentioned as SRSG, they are not so numerous. But at the same time, I don't think it is correct to say that the position of Nepal has not been recognized. First of all, there is constantly, regularly, and I'm doing it today, recognizing the contribution of Nepal. Secondly, Nepal has a seat in the Human Rights Council, which I think in itself, it gives to Nepal a certain prominence when it comes to these human rights and social issues that are being discussed. Gayan Acharya used to be the Undersecretary General for the landlocked country, and he's also a prominent Nepali. So no, I don't think that Nepal has not been given the place that it deserves. Once again, as I said, there are many countries in the United Nations that do contribute, that do look for a position. But I would say, for me, the role that Nepal can play, it's not only through having a person. It's the role that it plays through defending the values of the United Nations. For instance, Nepal is very active on the front of the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals. Nepal really wants to be a champion of the Sustainable Development Goals. And in that sense, it actually plays a big role in promoting the SDGs in different international forums, in defending these values and the principles that go with it. That's the big contribution that Nepal does, and that is recognized.
And a while ago, you just mentioned that it takes a lot of courage to send its troop to the different nation for war or something like that. Don't you think Nepal itself, in a whole, the role of Nepal is somewhere undermined?
Undermined by whom?
Undermined while recognizing its role or taking its place in the center front or something like that?
As I say, I think its role is highly recognized and appreciated, and on many forums and many spaces it has been recognized, the role of Nepal. And I would say, as I say once again, Nepal is present in the Human Rights Council. Nepal has a voice, participates in many of the committee of the United Nations. No, I think on the contrary, the contribution of Nepal is highly appreciated, valued and recognized.
And development and peace are very closely interlinked. How do you access the support of UN agencies to Nepal of achieving sustainable development goals?
You know, in Nepal, we are very present. It's one of the places where we have a big UN presence. Do you know that we have 20 agencies that are resident in Nepal, a total of 1,400 UN staff members in Nepal. Of those, more than 1,200 of them are Nepali. So that's a big UN presence and composed of Nepali personnel. So our intervention and our support granted to the government goes through different mechanisms. We work directly with institutions, with different ministries, institutions of the state, in order to propose our services in terms of expertise, in terms of technical assistance, with the support to development of policies, to the law drafting. We also work at the level of local government, provincial government, doing exactly the same thing. The work of the UN is also directly with society, directly with the public, with civil society. So the way to get the support of the UN is actually multifaceted, and we intervene at a very big number of levels, both nationally, subnationally, but also with different interlocutors.
We talked a lot about peace and how peace should be maintained. What's your personal opinion? What is peace for you?
Peace is the possibility that you and I have to be able to wake up in the morning and know that we can live the way we want. Peace means for an individual having the possibility to access the opportunities for his or her development, for the person to have the security, the physical security, and the possibility and a conducive environment to exploit, to develop his or her own potential to live the life that the person desires. Peace is freedom, is the possibility for a person to be able to make the choice he or she wants for his or her own life. Peace and development, as you said, work together. And this is what peace is all about, is the fact that you can live the life you want, you can decide for your own life, knowing that you have an environment that is secured, that is safe for you and your family.
Peace is freedom. I just love that line.
It is.
We're just wrapping up. Lastly, I'd like to know, transitional justice is something the world is looking very closely. Can you tell your view regarding the ongoing process of reconciliation in Nepal?
I don't think that the process of reconciliation really has been initiated per se, because in order to reach reconciliation, it has to be driven by the victims themselves. And so far, the transitional justice process in Nepal has not been progressing very well. Right now, Nepal is in the process of identifying commissioners for the two commissions, for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as well as the Commission on Enforced Disappearance. But there is an element that is very important and for which both international community as well as civil society have come up with the same call, which is to amend the Truth and Reconciliation Act in order to make sure that the transitional justice legal framework of Nepal is in compliance with international standards as well as in compliance with the Supreme Court ruling that says that there cannot be amnesty for certain type of crimes that internationally are recognized as not being amnestiable at all. So I think that there is still a long way to go for the transitional justice process in Nepal to go. The first step is definitely the amendment of the Act for the reasons I've mentioned. This has to be done in consultation with the victims and civil society, because transitional justice, it is about the victims. It is about also the responsibility of the state to recognize what happened. Therefore, the truth component is essential to identify the perpetrators and prosecute them. Each person, you, me, anybody, we have the right to justice. And actually, if you consider the disappearance of persons, more than 1,400 people have disappeared during the conflict. More than 14,000 people have been killed. People have a right to know what happened. People have a right to justice. These are rights. And actually, the killing of people, the disappearance, the enforced disappearance of people, these are violations of human rights. So therefore, these are crimes. And faced with a crime, the state has the responsibility to investigate and prosecute. So in that sense, the transitional justice hasn't yet started in Nepal. What has been done so far has been recognized as being insufficient, not enough resources. I'm very encouraged to hear the government saying that they are committed to giving more resources to the commissions and also to amend the Act. But this is an essential step. Victims have to know what happened. And you see, most of the time, victims are not even wanting justice because in the sense of revenge. Justice is not revenge. Victims want to know what happened to their loved ones. They want to be recognized as victims, and only then can reconciliation start. And actually, we have been talking about peace throughout this interview. Reconciliation is essential to peace. Transitional justice is essential to peace. Without transitional justice process, you cannot consolidate peace in a country.
As the transitional justice process is going on, most of the leaders of Nepal are with the view that Nepal is capable enough of handling the transitional justice process on its own. What's your take on this?
Actually, each country always undertake the transitional justice process, I would say, on its own. What we are saying as international community, it's the necessity to undertake it within the framework of the international standards that have been set as per the Human Rights Convention that Nepal is a party to. So, of course, Nepal has all the latitude and the prerogative to organize its transitional justice process within the framework of the international law. And we don't doubt that Nepal has the capacity. We would like to see it concretized soon.
Thank you, Valerie. It's wonderful hearing your thoughts on peace, peacekeeping missions, and so many other interesting stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.